Let's talk about the stuff that nobody understands about magnetism. Um, there are some crazy people out there on YouTube that are hijacking my work and claiming it as their own, and that's perfectly fine. Uh, However, they're not even going to get an insight into my fourth edition, so before they start claiming it as they came up with it first, let's state something here first. What do people think they understand about magnetism? Long before I ever ran across the ferrocell invention by my buddy Tim Vanderelli, I knew that the necessitated pressure mediation of a magnet must exist as a hypertrochoid, or what you would call a spirograph-like pattern. This is a little toy called a toroflux, by the way. It kind of looks like a slinky, but it isn't. It's a toroidal slinky, I guess you could call it. Obviously, you see a hypertrochoid pattern or a spirograph-like pattern. What does anybody know about the Poincaré disk model of projective geometry? All magnetism is two-dimensional. No, that can't be true. You've already said that magnetism is the only thing that defines volume or mass or space in the universe. That's true, but pressure mediation necessitates that pressure can only extrapolate itself out from one geomagnetic, what actually science calls a magnetic moment, which is completely meaningless gibberish. They also call the plane of inertia the block wall. There are actually 3 books ever written on the block wall, and none of them ever define what the block wall is. Obviously that it's not located there, since you could slice a magnet a million times, and each little slice would contain its own block wall or plane of inertia. That's because the only thing you're looking at is simplex pressure mediation. There is no plane of inertia located at the center of a magnet. Just like, there's a house located at XY coordinates, latitude and longitude on the face of the Earth. It's not located there as a pressure mediation. If you want to call the plane of inertia anything, you could call it an anti-field. It's where force and motion terminate. Even Walter Russell said this. I mean, it's as ridiculous to think of, what is the sound of Zen koan? The sound of one hand clapping. Obviously, it makes no sound at all. What's the sound of what is light when it stops waving? Well, it ceases to exist when it stops waving. What do we think about magnetism as far as what we can state about it specifically? All this stuff is completely clear in my head. 100%, yet finding the words to explain something so absolutely simple is so uniquely, the word is not difficult, but abstruse. That would be the correct word, is abstruse. You need to realize what the Poincaré model of projective geometry is. The spirograph-like pattern, which is a Fibonacci spiral, which exists at an angle of 137.50722, it's technically called the golden angle. But before I ever discovered the ferrocell, I knew that magnetism must exist like this. A lot of people love looking at the ferrocell images and will actually see the center inside the ferrocell and notice that there's no light there. And they go, oh my God, that's just like a black hole. No, what you're looking at, because you have to be able to define a magnet in your head to begin with, the only thing that defines a magnet, as opposed to just before it became a magnet, is field coherency. Otherwise, you just have a lump of neodymium iron boron or ferrite or samarium cobalt. What was that magnet 1 millisecond before it was magnetized and turned into a magnet? What was it? It was the exact same quantity. So the quantitative nature of what it was remains unchanged, only its qualitative nature. What was the qualitative nature of what we call a magnet? Field coherency. What then must we reify in extrapolation using retroductive logic and simplex intellectual analysis to then determine that if there is no quantitative change, only a qualitative one, what therefore defines the toroid? And 2, you have to understand that a magnet is not merely... We always, like little children, we're fascinated by the magnetism of a magnet. Just like little children are fascinated by a puppet show. But children only see the puppets in a puppet show. They don't see the hands yanking the strings behind the scene. The hand behind the scene in the case of a magnet, and this is how stupid humans are, the hand that's yanking the string, the field coherency that defines that loss of inertia, which then is the extrapolation of force and motion, is the inertia, is the plane of inertia, is counter space. That black hole that people say, oh, I get thousands of comments like that when people see my ferrocell videos using the ferrocell. Oh, there's no light there in the center. It just kind of looks like a black hole. That's due to gyromagnetic precession. People forget that what defines a magnet, or what defines specifically magnetism without defining the physical magnet itself, because magnetism obviously exists at the atomic scale. Remember back in the school days, we'd always say, well, an atom, we were taught this bullshit, and it's true, but it's magnetodielectricity. Well, every atom is 99.9999999% empty space. No, it's magnetodielectricity. What we first have to understand is that not only does Mother Nature not draw a line like we draw a line. I'm going to start here with a point and make a line. Here's a line, here's a line. This is Mother Nature's line. This, or this, or this. But that's only thinking two-dimensionally. So that is correct, but it's only half the story. Mother Nature's line is not only like this, but it is curvilinear. Everything works off of pressure mediation. You know, when you pull the drain on your bathtub, why doesn't the water just go straight down? Why does a vortex form when you flush the toilet or you pull the drain on your goddamn bathtub? Why? Now, I've got the full and detailed description of what a vortex is in the 4th edition of my book. But if you ask someone, so what's a vortex? Well, it's a no. No, you're telling me what you're seeing. Well, this is a vortex. I see a vortex right here. Well, a vortex is a spiral. No. That's what you're seeing. That's a description. That's not an explanation of what a vortex is. Mother Nature's line, i.e. force and motion, any extension from a 0 point of inertia, or the plane of inertia, is not merely like this, but like this. Now, the extrapolation necessitatively of a coherent mass, not merely in the atomic scale, first we have to take a look at a magnet and a pre-magnet. What's a pre-magnet? It is that neodymium iron boron lump before it is turned into a magnet. What is occurring in that pre-magnet or non-magnet? Well, we have the same gyromagnetic precession occurring at the atomic scale, but it is incoherent. It's pointing in every... Well, science already knew that. That's true. But if we make that entire mass coherent, wherein pressure mediation necessitates the incommensurability of the phased mass of that magnet, now must extrapolate out as pressure mediation not on the atomic level, okay, are you catching me? But on the level of the entire mass. See, the pre-magnet has as much magnetism as the magnet. But the pre-magnet only needs to extend out its gyromagnetic precession and field at the atomic or slightly above atomic level. But in the coherency that defines a magnet, we now have an entire mass whose extrapolation of pressure mediation, the force in motion, must not work itself out at the atomic level, but must work itself out coherently from the entire mass. This is also, by the way, when you have super huge magnets, the magnetic field isn't that big. Also, when you have super high magnetic Gaussian flux fields, like say an N60 or N65 Gaussian, people are like, oh wow, that's the most powerful magnet money can buy. And I tell them, yeah, but the more powerful the magnet is, the weaker the field extends out from it. The same is true in Hallback arrays, where they actually stack multiple neodymiums like pyramids. The pressure mediation works its way, since it's traveling in a cone or a pyramidal-shaped pattern, and they actually use these in medical experimentation. At the very, very top of that little pyramid, the Gaussian flux is upwards of 1.5 to 2 Teslas, but its depth is measured in sub-millimeters. Not millimeters, but sub-millimeters. So, now we have to think of a plane of inertia. And this is where you need to make your mind think three-dimensionally instead of two-dimensionally. So now we know that Mother Nature's loss of inertia is not only extrapolation of Mother Nature's line like this, but in a curvilinear. So, force and motion does not mediate itself out strictly like this, but in a curved linear fashion. But now how do you do that in a coherent mass where the atomic scale is not working out its pressure mediation at the level of its atomic structure or the surrounding domains? Actually, this is the wonderful scientific word for shit we don't know or science doesn't know. They call it a domain. That means that entire domain will work out its pressure mediation in that domain. And of course they're misaligned with everything else. Since there is no quantitative difference between the pre-magnet and the magnet, only a qualitative change, now we know that the phase and coherency is all working together as a single pressure mediation. So now we have a mass, say 2 inches by 2 inches or whatever the size of the shape the damn magnet is. Now we have a mass whose atomic structure is effectively, without getting into the minutiae, the size of that goddamn magnet. So you have basically an atom, that weighs 1.5 pounds and is 2 inches by 2 inches by 1 inch or whatever the size of that magnet is. The importance of that and understanding what's going on then will tell you that the magnetic pressure mediation working coherently must extrapolate itself out to its distant parts. And this is what fascinates human beings, is the magnetic field of the magnet. So now, instead of on the two-dimensional scale of a pressure mediation, of which there are countless billions of atoms in a pre-magnet, working themselves out in all different directions, we have the entire mass working itself out like this. Incommensurable. It's so hard to define incommensurability. This is not my premise. The deepest secrets of Pythagoreanism and Platonism, the only time that the Pythagoreans were said to have murdered somebody was for releasing the secrets of incommensurability. Point non-specific. Boy, I could make like 10 videos explaining incommensurability and people wouldn't get it. It's really simple in my head. It's very hard to explain. Point non-specific incommensurability. The really, really easy way to actually explain it would be like a holographic paradigm where in each tiny section of a hologram you actually find the entire hologram itself. If you take a hologram of a person's face, a holographic positive, and you cut out a little corner section down here where nothing exists, you can actually reproject laser light through it and it will show you the entire damn image. That's the fascinating thing of a holographic. So what you're seeing is a holographic print. The typical holograms you have, but a holographic positive, something different. That's incommensurability. The ancient Greeks and the Pythagoreans and who knows who before them discovered that thousands and thousands of years ago, before they understood what magnetism was, before obviously holograms existed. So now we have a magnetic mass of X dimensions in inches or half inches or whatever it is that must now extrapolate itself along with gyromagnetic precession. Remember, Mother Nature's line is not simply like this, but like this, a curved linear fashion. The lowest pressure mediation, if you actually take a look at one of these distant arms, and this is the field, the toroidal field you see on a magnet, you'll see if you follow one of these lines, it follows an arc like this. You see this? The center of which is the gyromagnetic precession. So this is the second half, or the second attributional phase of the loss of inertia, which defines magnetism. Not merely an extension, popped up by itself. It loves, these little toys are neat, they're only 20 bucks. They only extrapolate themselves out in this dimension, but in the third dimension. Obviously, since 100% of mass and magnitude of the universe is defined by magnetism, we cannot be thinking two-dimensionally, which human beings are so wont to do. We have to think three-dimensionally. If we're talking about mass and magnitude, obviously we can only be thinking three-dimensionally. So if we only take one distal arm of this toroidal, and by the way, this is the field geometry of force and motion. If we take the inverse of this image, we have the hyperboloid. What's a hyperboloid? Look it up. It's an hourglass shape. The antifield, which defines the inverse of a donut. Okay, you know this is a toroid or a donut. Well, what's the negative image in geometry of a donut? It's a hyperboloid. An hourglass shape in 3 dimensions, by the way. The negative image of this is a hyperboloid. That is the spatial geometry. It's technically the antispatial geometry of an antifield. That's technically the field of increasing inertia. That is the inverse of force and motion. That is the premise, the prequel, the loss of that inertia, which defines force and motion. And the dissipation of that force and motion, and all of this gets to defining a vortex, which I do in the 4th edition, defines the magnetic field. Force and motion, inertia and acceleration. Mother Nature is really simple. You know, she's not a crazy hooker on crack with a bag of magic particles. Okay? Nature only works off of a few fundamental principles: force and motion, inertia and acceleration, capacitance, resistance, permeability, and permittivity. Pretty simple, isn't it? You have to be able to think three-dimensionally. That black hole everybody loves to talk about when they see the Faro cell. Oh, it's like a black hole. No, you're actually seeing the topmost portion. Depends on which side you look at. It doesn't make any difference to call it the topmost or the bottommost portion of the antifield. An antifield? Yeah, increasing acceleration. The light doesn't exist there. You can see that right underneath the Faro cell. What people don't understand is when I wrote the first edition of my book on magnetism, after writing that and well into the 2nd edition, only did I even discover the Faro cell invention. I had no idea it even existed. I had happened to find the pattern somewhere on Google by happenstance, and like, this is it. This proves my theory complete. I knew I was right the whole time, and here it is staring at me from a guy's invention. And I contacted him, and he sent me, I bought an invention, bought one of his Faro cells, and he sent it to me, and therein, as they say, goes history. So, all of this stuff is very, very simple in my mind. Explaining it, however, is very abstruse. But this is the fundamental field mechanics of the universe: force and motion, inertia and acceleration. We have to understand that force and motion and the vortex extrapolates out its pressure mediation does not exist in 2 dimensions. Obviously, for magnitude and mass, which only defines magnetism, i.e. force and motion, it must extrapolate itself out in 3 dimensions, not only like this, but like this, along with curvilinear. That's why each one of these distal arms looks exactly like this. And the only reason it has dimensionality instead of 2-dimensionality, and this is the part your brain is probably never going to wrap itself around, the only reason why because technically that force and motion only exists 2-dimensionally. The only reason why it is like this and exists 3-dimensionally is due to the pressure mediation of the atomic mass, but acting in a coherent fashion. That's the incommensurability of the entire mass acting as a single unit. And if you can't wrap your mind around that, I can't help you, because I've dumbed it down as far as I can, and it really can't be dumbed down any further than that. You're going to have to walk the rest of the way, intellectually speaking. Lux y veritas. If you like this video, you can drop a buck or two and tell me to jump off a cliff, whatever makes you happy. But I can assure you of one thing, and you're going to say this is really, 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 really egotistical. The fat, bald, tattooed guy you see before you is the first human being on Earth to fully explain and understand what magnetism is and how it works. You can piss and moan and bitch and whine and gripe and piss all you want, but that fact will remain unchanged. No one's going to take it from me. I discovered it first. Other people have various glimpses of it. People say, oh, well, Tesla discovered it first. Oh, well, Idley Skalnin discovered it. Or Walter Russell. You know, I know all those people's works. I'm the guy that digitized Walter Russell's works. I've been over all of Tesla's writings, at least the stuff the public has access to. If any of them ever described magnetism, no, they didn't. Did any have fully even come halfway to fully explaining what magnetism is? Abso-fucking-lutely not. I love Tesla, I love Walter Russell, but none of them ever, in any writing that you can point to, ever told you what the hell magnetism technically was. They didn't do it, I did it. Because people love to tell me that. You didn't discover that. Yeah, I did, actually. I did. Oh, that's so egotistical. But is it right? But is it right? And it is right. As the Russians would say, увидимся.